All right, I'll start. First, thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it, especially on a Friday. I'm Sinkas. Also, my legal name is Anastasis, very Greek. I'm here on behalf of the Arbitrum OPCO, and I'm very happy, and also might be surprising to say that I'm working full-time at a DAO. Not as a contributor, but in an actual company set up by a DAO. I have a salary, I have all the perks that you have as an employee anywhere, but my employer is a DAO. I will unpack this as we go. I want to talk about operationalizing a DAO and what that means. What are the challenges, especially on the operational front, that we face with DAOs, and how, although they might look a bit romantic when we first chat about them, when you actually try to scale and do things that go beyond just this little community that we might have in a Discord or in an internet setting, in a forum, or in Snapshot, Tally, whatever voting platform that you might use, or in Solana, there are some others, how you start facing some problems that you wouldn't otherwise face beyond the digital realm. So, quick overview, I'm sure an event called Athens DAO, I'm sure most of you already know how DAOs operate, and this is a very broad way of interpreting the term. But typically you have DAOs, which is a series of, or a sum of individuals and organizations that all come together and work towards a common goal. Then they typically govern either a treasury or the protocol, or in some rare occasions, as we see in crypto, both. Typically, most DAOs typically just govern a treasury. So there's a smart contract that holds some funds, and then voting and discussing and making proposals can move that funds to specific goals and allocate them towards certain targets that the DAO wants to hit. In some other cases, you might also control the underlying protocol, be that the blockchain or an app. So typically the decision making works by, you have a community, a proposal might be created, someone from the community or a service provider externally, and then the DAO can vote on it, the people that hold tokens or the delegates that have voting power delegated to them, and then if the proposal is successful, the proposal will be executed. With, of course, some nuances, but this is the typical way that things happen. So this is an example proposal by in Arbitrum DAO. It was to sponsor an event in Bucharest in 2025. This is just one of the many proposals we have in the DAO, and as I'm sure in your own DAOs and the ones that you participate, you'll see like different friendly proposals. And typically what that looks like is a high-level overview of what we're trying to achieve, some details on what we're going to get back from doing it, like the benefits or why we're doing what we're doing. And they're broken down. They might include a timeline, a budget, some operational details even, and some even define who's going to execute. I chose this specifically because it does a great job at illustrating the problem that I want to talk about, which is sometimes we might all be in favor of doing something, but then nobody has real ownership of that, especially when it comes to the operational execution of it. So as we see here, we have like the timeline of events and what we're going to do by sponsoring and what we're going to get. But there's one question, that specific proposal, that remains unanswered. And I know, in some other cases, in some other proposals you might have seen, that is not the case, and it is being addressed, which is who handles all that, right? You had, okay, we're going to sponsor an event, we're going to get a booth in return, we're going to get 2 speaking slots, but then it's the DAO that gets them, so nobody really gets them, right? Then if we are to decide collectively as a DAO, all right, we have 2 speaking slots, who's going to talk to? Then we have to do a different vote and allocate, and then different proposals, and it's just not practical. We cannot vote and decide every single thing through a DAO vote. Which brings us to the point that DAOs are not a suitable counterparty in many cases, right? In a company, you'd have a decision to be made, and then you'd run it through the leadership, and an executive would be able to just, with authority, say, yes, we're going to do this. In DAOs, where the decentralization is what drives us, but is also becoming a burden in some cases, where, let's say we can vote to have a marketing strategy for something. Is it practical to vote for every single tweet? No, you would, allocate someone that task and say, okay, you do marketing, and they would have ownership of that task. But when that task needs to change, or they need to expend some money or whatever, that becomes a problem. Do I go back to the DAO? Do I just take it on myself and change it? How do we do that? So in DAOs, as I mentioned, typically all those things would happen through another vote, right? So let's say we allocate money to do an event, and suddenly things have changed, we need to pivot, or we need to make the event smaller, bigger, hire more people, bring more guests, whatever. If we are to decide all those things through a different proposal, as the meme goes, here we go again. So, when the DAO votes in favor of a proposal, whatever that might be, either a practical one like funding an event or allocating money to DeFi protocols, whatever that might be, some cases, or in the majority, as I've seen from experience, is that a lot of the details, especially on the operational and the ownership side, are left unaddressed, right? From whether the executing party, the people doing the proposal, let's say we hire a treasury manager to allocate money from a DAO to DeFi protocols. Are they responsible for the money, or they're just a service provider for the DAO? Are they responsible for changing the strategy if something is not working, or they should just make proposals to the DAO and the delegate should vote to change the strategy or not? Then typically, in most cases, especially when we're dealing with the real world, you have an entity to step in. Typically, it's the labs or the foundation from the underlying ecosystem to make things work, be that as a legal entity. You know, if you have to hire an event producer to organize an event, you have to have invoices, you have to sign agreements. And the DAO, as I mentioned earlier, is just this group of people and entities, right? So none of them will take on the responsibility of individually going into a grant agreement. You need to wrap all this thing in a legal entity. Typically, it's the foundation or a labs, but in some DAOs, we've seen different solutions to that problem, either sub-DAOs like in MakerDAO, or as I'll talk in a bit, in Arbitrum, we have set up the OPCO. And proposal authors typically don't want to deal with things that fall fall outside the scope of what they're trying to execute. So if a service provider comes to either organize an event or allocate money, they don't want to deal with having to set up a legal entity to do that. They don't want to deal with reporting to the DAO. They just want to execute on their mandate. So we'll do a very quick live example here, which I think is always fun. Let's say, well, we already had lunch most probably, as we had the break, but let's say we're going to order food for lunch. Like, I'll make it simple. Can you please just humor me and raise your hand if theoretically you're hungry and you wanted to order pizza? Who wants to eat pizza? All right, just a couple folks. Who wants to eat souvlaki? All right, and who wants to eat a burger? Okay, by very loose calculation, I think souvlaki has it. So we'll order souvlaki, right? So we're all set? Anyone? Were we all set? How we voted? The decision has been made. There's one guy who gets the thumbs down. There's a lot of questions that remain unaddressed. Who's going to order? Who's going to pay for it? From which shop? Are we going to use an app? Are we going to call? Is there anyone responsible for going outside and seeing if anyone from the event also wants to order and is not here in the room with us right now? That ownership is diffused in the DAO. We all vote, yes, we are hungry, we're going to pay using the treasury, we're going to order some souvlaki to eat, but nobody has the real ownership of that decision. As I mentioned earlier, all those little details, in this example, it's all those things I mentioned here, those small parameters, but you can imagine that just from a simple decision of how we're going to order food, we have a bunch of questions that derive. Imagine if you have way more complicated decisions to make. For example, if you are talking about a technical upgrade for a protocol that handles billions of transactions, or if you want to allocate a couple $100 million into DeFi apps. So in DAOs, what that looks like is, as a few examples that I've added here, is like fiat wire transfers. If you want to pay an entity using fiat, you need to have a bank account, you need to have money, you need to have someone have that bank account. If you need to go into agreements with someone, typically you need to go through KYC, KYB, or have the users go through KYC, KYB, entering into contracts with service providers or individuals, communications with other stakeholders. Someone needs to organize all those things. Marketing of an initiative. Just because we allocated funds as a DAO to fund an event, it shouldn't stop there. We should also promote the fact and try to market it as a DAO, not just rely on the event organizer or in DeFi apps or whatever that is. Project management of all the different initiatives. You might have many different parallel initiatives running in parallel, and all those should be communicating with each other. But typically in DAOs, they live in a silo and they all focus on executing just their own scope. So in Arbitrum, the way we did that is we created an OPCO, short for operational company. It was an entity that was stood up by the DAO and funded by the DAO, as we'll see. It came through a proposal, right? So we had Okay, so we had a proposal to create the entity. Delegates voted. There was a deliberation for that and discussion for a couple of months to actually get this done. The budget was about $12 million back then to fund it and set it up. Then the DAO elected the Oversight and Transparency Committee, which you can think of it as a board for a traditional company, the people responsible for overseeing that the entity actually works and works for the benefit of Arbitrum and the DAO. And the way it very vaguely works is that it starts acting as the foundation for every initiative that the DAO wants to undertake. So let's say we want to set up a grants agreement. The grants allocator that we might elect or hire to actually review grants applications and distribute the funds doesn't have to set up an entity. He doesn't have to handle KYC, KYB. He doesn't have to handle contracts. All that is done by the operational company, and that person lives and works theoretically under the umbrella of the OPCO. Similar to how you'd have any traditional company work, only this one is set up and funded and controlled by the DAO and DAO elected people. In Arbitrum, there's a bunch of entities like that. We have like the foundation, we have Off-Chain Labs, we have Entropy, which was another entity funded by the DAO, AGV, which is a gaming venture fund funded by the DAO, and more recently the OPCO, and all those work and collaborate together with the operational company starting to act as the glue that binds everything together and being the control panel of the DAO, sorting all those things that I mentioned earlier, from operational issues all the way to project management and communication and co-marketing of initiatives, making sure that everything works together. This is not very relevant for this presentation, but OPCO's focus in the mid-term future is to streamline the operation, lead our own initiatives through the entity, enable different DAO initiatives that other people do just under our umbrella so we can help operationalize them, and act as the glue for all the entities that I mentioned earlier. And you can learn more if you want to scan the QR and go to the website and just see how things work and who the people there are. That would be all. Happy to answer any questions, as I'm sure you probably have.
What happens if the company's board members go rogue?
As in?
As in, use the company's treasury to go on vacation.
Okay, so there's many ways that there's like breaks for situations like this in the DAO. If you're talking about the employees, such as myself, for example, where we have a bank account, I have a credit card, theoretically I could use it to buy, I don't know, shoes, whatever. Firstly, you'd have, like the first layer is the traditional organizational setup you'd have in any company, right? I have someone above me, the head of operations would be my direct report. So they would be responsible for what I do. Now, above our executive team, let's say the head of the OPCO, the director, the CEO, we have the board. And traditional to any company, if the CEO starts using money for their own benefit or doing, going rogue, as you put it in more broader sense, then they would have to report to the board. Now, if the board goes rogue, firstly, the board doesn't have any funds. They do not control any funds. The funds that actually they're getting paid to be the board and their salary for being on the board is controlled by the entity, the OPCO. And all those things, the funds are moved through multi-sig wallets, and all the multi-sigs, it's just a standard practice we have in all the DAOs, that all the multi-sigs that we deploy as a DAO have to have something called the Zodiac Governor module. What that does is the DAO at any time can vote to claw back the funds from the multi-sig. So theoretically, there's a couple layers, and the base layer of them all is the actual DAO. If there is reason to believe that the OAT is going rogue and they're not executing on their mandate, the DAO can vote to revoke the funding and pull the funds back. And that's also true for the Arbitrum Foundation as well. So the foundation itself has money on the multisig that the DAO can claw back at any time. And in both of those entities, it's also in the legal bylaws. So the entity is a Cayman Island Foundation, and the bylaws, the legal documents that have created the company, stipulate that if the DAO votes to, let's say, change the director, they have to oblige and change the director. If they do not, they actually face legal consequences because it's in the bylaws and the entity was set up as such.
So basically the DAO cannot, like a backstop, to any action the company decides.
Exactly. And the idea is that you want to have the DAO act as a backstop for gross misuse or whatever. You don't want to have the DAO vote for every single detail that we do. Right? For example, I was most recently setting up a grants program, and I had to choose like a service provider for KYC and KYB. The DAO shouldn't have to vote on which service provider I use. I go with something, I make that decision. If everyone is not pleasant with it or there's like huge problems with it or whatever, then the DAO can step. It's more of like a veto function rather than a decision-making function.
Another question I want to make is, what's the minimum amount of tokens you need to propose something in the Arbitrum DAO, and what's the monetary value of this number?
Yeah, so right now the minimum amount for off-chain votes, so votes that do not have an executable component, I think was at about 500,000 ARB, or it might be a bit more. And the reason I'm not remembering the exact numbers is because it's dynamic, it changes based on the supply. And for an on-chain vote, last I checked, was about 2 million ARB to make a proposal, which in monetary fund would translate like it's, let's say 20 cents per ARB right now. So like 400K, I think, if my math's correct. But you could also have like a delegate sponsor a proposal. So you have a proposal, you will bring it to the forum if it's being discussed and delegates want to support it and want to bring it forward. Let's say you don't have the voting power, but I have. I can put it up on for a vote on your behalf. The threshold is there to prevent spam proposals, basically. Other questions? I suppose not, so thank you. There is.
How did you go about electing the oversight committee that you mentioned?
So there was, after the original proposal to fund the OPCO passed, there was a forum post and a call for applications that was also circulated on Twitter and disseminated in our own networks. People applied. There was calls in the DAO organized by the DAO to discuss the applications, and everyone could pitch themselves. And then there was elections in the DAO, voted by the delegates and token holders. That's it. Right. Thank you so much.